The night sky over Burkina Faso stretched endlessly, a black canvas without a single star to pierce its darkness. Heavy clouds rolled across the heavens like silent waves, swallowing the moon whole and casting the vast savanna into an impenetrable shadow. The air hung thick with the promise of rain that would not come, carrying the scent of dry earth and distant cooking fires from villages scattered across the landscape. Far from the sleeping settlements, where children dreamed of tomorrow's meals and mothers worried about school fees, a convoy of 70 massive trucks thundered down the main highway like a mechanical river of steel and chrome. Their engines roared in unison, a deep rhythmic sound that vibrated through the ground and sent small animals scurrying into the brush. Each truck's headlights cut twin beams through the darkness, creating a serpentine line of white light that stretched for kilometers along the empty road. The trucks were identical, massive 16-wheelers with reinforced chassis and oversized fuel tanks. Their drivers had been chosen carefully, men who knew how to navigate treacherous roads in absolute darkness, men who understood the value of silence and the price of discretion. Each vehicle carried a single enormous shipping container, unmarked and sealed with heavy-duty locks that would take industrial equipment to break. The containers themselves were unremarkable, standard steel shipping units that could be found at any port or industrial facility. But their contents would have made the average citizen of Burkina Faso weep with rage and heartbreak. At the head of the convoy, in the lead truck's cab, a weathered man named Bakari gripped the steering wheel with calloused hands. He had been driving trucks for 23 years, hauling everything from grain to construction materials across West Africa's dusty highways. But tonight was different. Tonight, the weight in his trailer felt heavier than anything he had ever carried, and not just because of its physical mass. The knowledge of what lay behind him, sealed in that steel container, pressed down on his conscience like a stone. His passenger, a nervous young man named Sekou, who served as the convoy's navigator, kept checking his watch and scanning the road ahead with darting eyes. "How much further to the border?" Sekou asked for the third time in an hour, his voice barely audible over the engine's rumble. 2 hours, Bakari replied without taking his eyes off the road. "Maybe less if we don't hit any checkpoints." Sekou wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. "The boss said there wouldn't be any problems." "He said the route was clear," Bakari grunted. In his experience, when rich men promised that illegal operations would proceed smoothly, it usually meant they had bought off the right officials or threatened the right families. Neither possibility made him feel better about what they were doing. Behind them, the convoy stretched like a metal serpent, each driver maintaining perfect spacing and speed. Radio chatter was kept to an absolute minimum, with coded phrases for essential communications. The men had been told they were transporting mining equipment to a processing facility across the border. Most of them suspected otherwise, but the pay was too good to ask questions. And in a country where steady work was scarce, moral flexibility often meant the difference between feeding your family and watching them go hungry. 300 kilometers away, in the capital city of Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré stood in his private study on the second floor of the presidential palace. The room was spartanly furnished, reflecting the military background that had shaped both his leadership style and his personal philosophy. A simple wooden desk dominated the space, flanked by 2 worn leather chairs that had seen countless meetings and difficult decisions. Maps of Burkina Faso covered one wall, marked with different colored pins indicating mining sites, military installations, and development projects. On another wall hung portraits of the country's founding fathers and a photograph of Ibrahim in his military uniform. Taken during his service as a young paratrooper, Ibrahim was not a tall man, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through action rather than birthright. His dark skin bore the weathered lines of a life spent under the African sun, first as a soldier and later as a leader fighting for his people's dignity. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, reflected an intelligence sharpened by years of studying both military strategy and economic policy. At 43, he was young for a president. But the weight of his nation's struggles had aged. Him beyond his years, the president had been reviewing agricultural reports when the secure phone on his desk rang. with the urgent tone reserved for national security matters. The digital clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. Emergency calls at this hour usually meant trouble, either an external threat or internal corruption that couldn't wait for. "Morning, President Traoré," he answered, his voice immediately alert despite the late hour. "Mr. President, this is Captain Musa Sori," came the crackling voice through the encrypted line. "I apologize for the hour, sir, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Captain Sori was the commander of the Presidential Guard's intelligence unit, a man Ibrahim had personally selected for his integrity and competence. If Sori was calling at midnight, the situation was serious. "Go ahead, Captain," Ibrahim said, moving to the window that overlooked the palace grounds. Below, he could see the sentries making their rounds, their shadows moving between the acacia trees that lined the main courtyard. "Sir, our surveillance teams at the Essakane mining complex reported unusual activity tonight. They observed approximately 70 heavy trucks departing the facility under cover of darkness. The vehicles were not scheduled for any legitimate transport operations, and initial reconnaissance suggests they may be carrying refined gold ore." Ibrahim felt his jaw tighten. The Essakane mine was one of the country's most productive gold extraction sites, generating revenue that was supposed to fund healthcare, education, and infrastructure development. If someone was stealing from the mine, they were stealing directly from the mouths of schoolchildren and the medicine cabinets of rural clinics. "How much are we talking about, Captain?" Ibrahim asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Based on the number of trucks and their apparent cargo capacity, sir, we could be looking at several tons of refined gold. Conservative estimates put the value at over 200 million CFA francs, possibly much more." The number hit Ibrahim like a physical blow. 200 million francs could build 50 schools, stock a dozen hospitals with essential medicines for a year, or dig water wells for hundreds of villages. It represented months of the government's development budget, money that had been desperately needed and carefully allocated. "What's the current location of the convoy?" Ibrahim asked, his mind already shifting into tactical mode. "Our spotters report they're traveling south on the N1 highway, approximately 150 kilometers from the border. At their current speed, they'll cross into Ghana within 3 hours unless we intercept them." Ibrahim closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Once those trucks crossed the border, the gold would disappear into the international market, processed and refined until its origins were untraceable. It would be sold to jewelry manufacturers in Dubai or London, transformed into luxury items that might eventually find their way back to African markets at 1,000% markup. His people's wealth would be stolen twice, once from the ground, and again when they were forced to buy back their own resources as expensive imports. "Captain, mobilize the rapid response team immediately," Ibrahim ordered. "I want our best men, fully equipped, ready to move in 15 minutes. Sir, are you planning to personally lead this operation?" Sori's voice carried a note of concern. The situation could be dangerous. These people obviously have significant resources if they can coordinate an operation of this scale. Ibrahim looked at his reflection in the window. Glass, a man bearing the weight of a nation's hopes and the constant pressure of limited resources and unlimited needs. "Captain, that gold represents the future of thousands of our children. If I'm not willing to risk my life to protect their future, what kind of leader am I?" "Understood, sir. We'll be ready." As Ibrahim prepared to leave his study, he paused at his desk to look at a photograph that always accompanied him on difficult missions. A picture of a young girl from a village in the northern provinces. She was perhaps 8 years old, with intelligent eyes and a hopeful smile, despite the obvious poverty reflected in her worn clothing and thin frame. He had met her during a presidential visit to distribute textbooks to rural schools. When he asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she had said simply, "I want to help my people be healthy and strong." That little girl, whose name was Aminata, represented everything Ibrahim was fighting for. She was the reason he had left a comfortable military career to enter the treacherous world of politics. She was why he worked 18-hour days and slept poorly, why he constantly pushed for greater transparency in government spending and more aggressive anti-corruption measures. The gold being stolen tonight could fund the medical school where Aminata might one day study, or the hospital where she might save lives. Ibrahim tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket, as he always did before dangerous missions, and headed for the door. The corridor outside his study was already bustling with activity as palace staff prepared for the emergency operation. His aide, an efficient young woman named Fatoumata, appeared at his side with a tactical vest and his service weapon. "Sir, Captain Sori is assembling the team in the motor pool," she reported. "They'll be ready to deploy in 12 minutes. "Thank you, Fatoumata. Contact the Defense Ministry and put them on alert. If this operation is as large as it appears, we may need additional support." "Already done, sir. Minister Sankara is standing by with reserve units." Ibrahim nodded approvingly as they walked quickly toward the palace's rear exit. Fatoumata had been with him for 3 years, and her anticipation of his needs in crisis situations had proven invaluable. She was another young person whose future depended on stopping thieves, like the ones now racing toward the border with stolen wealth. The presidential motor pool occupied a large concrete building behind the main palace complex. When Ibrahim arrived, he found Captain Sori overseeing final preparations for what looked like a small military campaign. 12 of the presidential guard's most experienced soldiers were checking weapons and equipment with the methodical precision of professionals who understood that their lives might depend on every detail being perfect. Captain Sori himself was an impressive figure, tall and lean, with the quiet confidence of a career soldier who had seen combat in peacekeeping operations across West Africa. His dark skin bore several scars from various conflicts, and his eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had looked death in the face and refused to blink. He had served under Ibrahim during the president's military days, and their mutual trust had been forged in situations where failure meant not just personal defeat, but the loss of innocent lives. "Status report, Captain," Ibrahim said as he approached the group. "Sir, we have 2 armored personnel carriers ready for deployment, plus a support vehicle with communications equipment and medical supplies. The men are carrying standard assault rifles plus equipment for setting up a roadblock. Our intelligence unit has identified an optimal interception point, approximately 40 kilometers south of here, a section of highway with clear sight, lines and limited escape routes." Ibrahim studied the tactical map. Sori spread on the hood of the lead vehicle. The proposed interception site was well chosen, a long, straight section of road with minimal cover for anyone attempting to flee on foot, and geographic features that would prevent the trucks from leaving the highway to escape through the bush. "What about civilian traffic?" Ibrahim asked. "I don't want innocent people caught in the crossfire if this turns violent." "The highway is typically empty at this hour, sir, but we've coordinated with the highway patrol to redirect any civilian vehicles until the operation is complete." One of the soldiers, a sergeant named Paul Uedraogo, approached with additional intelligence. "Mr. President, our advanced scouts report that the convoy appears to be lightly defended. No visible military vehicles, no obvious security escort. It's possible they're relying on stealth rather than force." Ibrahim considered this information. Professional thieves operating on this scale would have contingency plans, possibly including bribery of officials or predetermined escape routes. The lack of obvious security might mean they were confident that their operation would proceed without interference, which suggested corruption at high levels of government or military. "Captain, we proceed as planned, but we must assume they have additional resources we haven't identified. Brief the men that this could escalate quickly." "Yes, sir." Sori turned to address the assembled soldiers. "Gentlemen, our mission tonight is to intercept and secure a convoy of trucks carrying stolen gold. This represents a theft from every citizen of Burkina Faso, including your own families. We will conduct this operation with maximum professionalism and minimum use of force. Our goal is to recover the stolen property and apprehend the perpetrators for legal prosecution." The soldiers listened intently, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the situation. These were men who had sworn an oath to protect their nation, and they understood that this protection included safeguarding the economic resources that funded development and social services. "Rules of engagement are as follows," Sori continued. "We will attempt to stop the convoy through roadblock and verbal commands. If they comply peacefully, we secure the vehicles and detain the drivers for questioning. If they resist, we are authorized to use necessary force to prevent the theft from succeeding. However, our primary objective is recovery of the stolen goods, not inflicting casualties. These drivers may be hired transporters rather than the actual perpetrators. Ibrahim added his own words to the briefing. Remember, men, we are not just soldiers tonight. We are guardians of our nation's future. That gold represents schools for children who have none, medicine for the sick, clean water for villages that have been waiting years for development. We fight not just against thieves, but against the poverty and hopelessness that their theft would perpetuate. The soldiers responded with a unified, "Yes, sir," that echoed through the motor pool. Within minutes, the convoy was loaded and moving toward the palace gates. As they drove through the darkened streets of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim noticed lights coming on in windows as residents awakened to the sound of military vehicles. Word would spread quickly that something significant was happening, but the details would remain secret until the operation was complete. The highway south of the capital was empty except for their small convoy. The road was well maintained in this section, part of a transportation improvement project funded by the very mining revenues that were now being stolen. The irony was not lost on Ibrahim as their vehicles raced toward the interception point at speeds that would have been impossible on the deteriorated roads found in more remote parts of the country. Captain Traoré, riding in the lead vehicle beside the president, received regular updates from the surveillance team that was tracking the stolen convoy. "Sir, target convoy is maintaining speed and heading. They should reach our intercept point in approximately 37 minutes. Any change in their formation or behavior?" "Negative, sir. They appear unaware that they've been detected." Ibrahim hoped this assessment was accurate, but his military experience had taught him never to underestimate an opponent. The scale and coordination of tonight's theft suggested professional planning, which meant the perpetrators had likely considered various contingencies, including the possibility of government intervention. As they drove through the darkness, Ibrahim found himself thinking about the broader implications of what they were confronting. Gold theft was not just a criminal act, it was a form of economic warfare against African development. For decades, the continent's natural resources had been extracted by foreign interests, processed elsewhere, and sold back to African markets at enormous markup. This pattern of exploitation had kept Africa poor despite its vast mineral wealth. Countries like Burkina Faso were beginning to demand greater control over their resources, insisting that mining operations provide local employment, environmental protection, and fair revenue sharing. But criminal networks were adapting, using corruption and outright theft to maintain their access to African wealth. Tonight's operation represented the kind of resource plundering that had impoverished Africa for generations. The interception point came into view as they crested a small hill, a long, straight section of highway flanked by acacia trees and scattered termite mounds. The landscape was typical of the Sahel region, semi-arid grassland that turned green during the brief rainy season and golden brown for most of the year. In daylight, this area would be peaceful and beautiful, with cattle herders moving their animals between water sources and women walking to market with goods balanced gracefully on their heads. "Deploy the roadblock," Ibrahim ordered as their vehicles reached the predetermined position. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, unloading portable barriers and spike strips that would disable any vehicle attempting to crash through their checkpoint. Powerful floodlights were positioned to illuminate the highway in both directions, creating a zone where nothing could pass unseen. Two of the armored vehicles were positioned across the road, leaving just enough space for the soldiers to take defensive positions while maintaining fields of fire. Captain Traoré established a communications post with radio equipment that could reach both the palace and military installations throughout the country. If this operation revealed a larger conspiracy, they would need to coordinate additional arrests and investigations quickly. "All positions ready, Mr. President," Traoré reported. "Estimated time to contact is 12 minutes. Ibrahim stepped out of his vehicle and walked to the center of the roadblock. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant wood smoke. Above them, the cloud cover was beginning to break, allowing glimpses of stars that had been hidden earlier. It seemed symbolic, darkness giving way to light, secrets about to be exposed. He thought again of young Aminata and the thousands of children like her whose futures hung in the balance. Education, healthcare, infrastructure development, all depended on the government having resources to invest in its people. Every franc stolen tonight was a book not purchased, a vaccine not administered, a water pump not installed. The distant rumble of heavy trucks began to reach them, growing steadily louder as the convoy approached. It was a deep, mechanical sound that seemed to make the ground vibrate. Ibrahim checked his watch. The thieves were actually slightly ahead of schedule, suggesting they were pushing their vehicles hard to reach the border. "Contact in sight," reported the soldier operating the observation equipment. "Lead vehicle approximately 2 kilometers out." Through the darkness, twin points of light appeared on the horizon, growing larger and brighter as they approached. Soon the lights multiplied as more trucks became visible, creating a string of illumination that stretched back into the night like a necklace of stars fallen to earth. "Remember," Ibrahim called to his men, "we want these people alive and able to answer questions. The drivers are likely just hired transporters. The real criminals are whoever organized this operation." The sound of the approaching convoy grew deafening as the lead truck crested the hill and suddenly found itself facing the government roadblock. The driver's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Brakes screamed as the massive vehicle fought to stop, its trailer swaying dangerously as momentum carried it forward. Behind the first truck, a chain reaction of braking and swerving began as each driver in the convoy reacted to the sudden obstacle. "Switch on all lights," Sori commanded. The night exploded into day as the powerful floodlights activated, bathing the highway in harsh white illumination that revealed the full scope of the theft. 70 trucks, each carrying a shipping container, stretched back along the road in a line that seemed to go on forever. The scale of the operation was even more impressive and audacious than the intelligence reports had suggested. Captain Sori raised a megaphone and his voice boomed across the highway. "Drivers of all vehicles, this is the Burkina Faso Presidential Guard. Switch off your engines immediately and exit your vehicles with your hands visible. You are suspected of transporting stolen property." For several long moments, nothing happened. The trucks sat motionless in the glare of the floodlights, their engines ticking as they cooled. Ibrahim could see faces in the truck cabs, some frightened, some calculating, all trying to assess their situation and options. Then slowly, the door of the lead truck opened. A man climbed down carefully, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He was tall and lean, wearing a dusty brown jacket and work boots. His face showed the weathered lines of someone who spent his life on the road, but his eyes held an intelligence that suggested he was more than just a simple truck driver. "We have transport papers," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "We are carrying mining equipment for the Tanluca processing facility." "Present your documents for inspection," Sori ordered, while 2 soldiers approached the man with weapons ready but not directly threatening. The driver reached slowly into his jacket and produced a folder containing what appeared to be official transportation documents. One of the soldiers took the papers to Captain Sori, who examined them under a tactical flashlight. Sori's face darkened as he read. "Mr. President, these documents are forgeries. The letterhead is incorrect. The permit numbers don't match our database, and the signatures are clearly fraudulent." Ibrahim stepped forward into the circle of light. When the truck driver saw him, his eyes widened in recognition and fear. Whispers began to ripple through the other drivers who had emerged from their vehicles. "It's President Traoré himself," someone said in a voice filled with awe and terror. The lead driver's composure cracked slightly. He stepped back, his confident demeanor replaced by nervous uncertainty. "Mr. President, there must be some mistake. We were told these were legitimate transport orders." Ibrahim's voice was calm, but carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "If you are innocent transporters carrying legitimate cargo, you have nothing to fear from inspection. However, if you are participating in the theft of Burkina Faso's gold, you are stealing from every child, every sick person, every family that depends on our national resources for their future." He gestured toward the lead truck. "Open the container and show us what you are carrying." 2 soldiers climbed onto the truck's trailer and began working to unlock the heavy steel container. The locks were industrial grade, requiring bolt cutters to remove. As the doors swung open with a metallic groan, one of the soldiers shined his flashlight into the interior. What happened next would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The beam of the flashlight struck something inside the container that blazed back with an almost supernatural golden fire. The interior of the container was packed floor to ceiling with rough burlap sacks, and from between the coarse fibers of the sacks, raw gold ore caught the light and reflected it back in brilliant yellow flashes. "Sweet ancestors," whispered one of the soldiers. Captain Traoré climbed up to look inside the container, his flashlight revealing the full extent of what they had discovered. Hundreds of sacks of gold ore, each weighing perhaps 50 kilograms, stacked with the methodical precision of professional thieves. The gold was in various forms, some still raw ore with chunks of quartz and other minerals, some partially refined into rough ingots, all of it representing wealth beyond most people's imagination. Ibrahim felt a cold rage building in his chest. Each sack represented resources that should have been used for development projects, schools in remote villages, medical clinics for rural areas, roads to connect isolated communities to markets and opportunities. Instead, this wealth was being spirited away in the night to enrich foreign criminals and corrupt officials. "Search every truck," he ordered. "I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The soldiers spread out along the convoy, opening container after container. Each one revealed the same sight: tons of stolen gold ore, carefully packaged and ready for transport to processing facilities where it would be refined and sold on international markets. The sheer scale of the theft was staggering, representing millions of dollars in stolen resources. As the search continued, Ibrahim gathered the truck drivers in the center of the roadblock. There were nearly 70 men, ranging in age from young adults to grizzled veterans of West Africa's transportation networks. Most looked frightened, but a few showed signs of defiance or calculation, as if they were still looking for ways to escape or minimize their legal exposure. "I want to know who organized this operation," Ibrahim announced to the assembled drivers. "Who paid you? Who provided the false documents? Who told you where to pick up the cargo and where to deliver it?" The response was a wall of silence. Some drivers stared at the ground, others glanced nervously at their companions, but none spoke. Ibrahim had expected this. Criminal organizations typically ensured their operatives silence through a combination of generous payment and credible threats. Captain Traoré approached the president and spoke in a low voice. "Sir, we need to consider the possibility that some of these men have families who could be threatened if they cooperate with us. The organization behind this theft obviously has significant resources and reach." Ibrahim nodded, understanding the dilemma. In countries where the rule of law was sometimes weak, criminal organizations often maintained control through intimidation of witnesses and their families. However, he also knew that allowing this theft to succeed would encourage similar operations, ultimately stealing far more from the nation than could ever be recovered through after-the-fact investigations. He addressed the drivers again, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. "I understand that some of you may fear for your family's safety if you cooperate with us. I give you my word as president of Burkina Faso that anyone who provides information about this operation will receive full protection for themselves and their loved ones. Our nation's security forces will guard your families day and night until the criminals behind this theft are apprehended." Still, the silence continued. Ibrahim was preparing to order the men taken to secure facilities for individual interrogation when he noticed one driver near the back of the group who seemed to be struggling with internal conflict. The man was perhaps 30 years old, with the calloused hands and sun-weathered face of someone who worked with heavy machinery. Unlike the others, he kept glancing toward the president as if wanting to speak but being held back by fear. "You," Ibrahim said, pointing to the conflicted driver. "What is your name?" The man swallowed hard before answering. "Amadou Sawadogo, Mr. President. I'm from Bobo Dioulasso." "Amadou, you look like a man with something to say. Speak freely." Amadou glanced nervously at the other drivers, several of whom were staring at him with expressions that could only be described as threatening. His voice shook as he responded. "Mr. President, I have a wife and 2 young children. If I speak, the people who organized this might hurt them." Ibrahim stepped closer to Amadou, speaking in a voice that was firm but kind. Your children deserve to grow up in a country where their natural resources are used to build their future, not stolen to enrich criminals. Help me protect all of our children, and I will protect yours. You have my word as a soldier and as your president. For several long moments, Amadou wrestled with his decision. Around him, the other drivers watched with expressions ranging from sympathy to hostility. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. The people who organized this are not from Burkina Faso, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They are foreigners, businessmen from Europe and Asia who work with local criminals to steal our resources. But they could not do this alone. They have help from some of our own people, politicians and officials who take bribes to look the other way. Ibrahim felt his jaw clench. Corruption was one of the greatest obstacles to African development, allowing foreign interests to exploit the continent's resources while local officials enrich themselves at their people's expense. Do you know the names of these corrupt officials? Ibrahim asked. Amadou nodded reluctantly. Some of them. The foreign businessmen held meetings with government people to plan this operation. They promised to share the profits once the gold was processed and sold overseas. Captain Traoré approached with a notebook and pen. We need those names, he said firmly. As Amadou began to speak, revealing the identities of officials who had betrayed their public trust, Ibrahim felt a mixture of anger and determination. The theft of natural resources was bad enough, but the corruption of government officials made it a betrayal of the highest order. These officials had sworn oaths to serve their people, only to sell out their nation's future for personal gain. The names Amadou provided included several prominent figures in government and business, men who lived in luxury while ordinary citizens struggled with poverty, men who smiled and made speeches about national development while secretly working to undermine it. Each name represented not just personal corruption, but the theft of opportunities from millions of Burkinabe people. What was the plan for this gold once it reached its destination? Ibrahim asked. They were going to take it to processing facilities in other countries, Amadou explained. There, it would be refined and made into jewelry and other products. Then some of it would be sold back to African markets at very high prices. They wanted to steal our gold and then sell it back to us for 100 times what they paid. This revelation struck Ibrahim like a physical blow. The criminals weren't just stealing Burkina Faso's gold. They were planning to profit from it twice, first through theft and then through exploitation of African consumers. It was a perfect example of the economic colonialism that had kept Africa poor despite its vast natural wealth. As Amadou finished providing information, Ibrahim turned to Captain Traoré. Captain, I want arrest warrants prepared immediately for every official named in this testimony. I want their assets frozen and their movements restricted. And I want protection details assigned to Amadou's family and any other witnesses who cooperate with our investigation. Yes, sir. I'll coordinate with domestic security immediately. The eastern horizon was beginning to show the first pale hints of dawn as the immediate crisis phase of the operation concluded. The stolen gold was secured, the drivers were in custody, and the investigation was expanding to include the corrupt officials who had made the theft possible. But Ibrahim knew that this was just the beginning of a larger struggle. As the convoy of seized trucks began the journey back to Ouagadougou, escorted by military vehicles, Ibrahim reflected on the broader implications of what they had discovered. This theft attempt was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of resource extraction that had impoverished Africa for generations. Foreign interests, working with local collaborators, systematically stripped the continent of its wealth while leaving behind poverty and underdevelopment. The road back to the capital was lined with early risers, farmers heading to their fields, women walking to market, children beginning the long trek to distant schools. As the unusual convoy passed, people stopped to stare and whisper among themselves. Word was spreading that something significant had happened during the night. By the time they reached the presidential palace, news crews and curious citizens had gathered outside the gates. The story of the gold theft and recovery was already spreading through radio broadcasts and social media, creating a buzz of excitement and speculation. Throughout the country, Ibrahim knew that how he handled the public communication about this. incident would be crucial for his administration's credibility and for public trust in government institutions. He decided to address the nation directly, explaining not just what had happened, but why it mattered for every citizen's future. The press conference was hastily organized in the palace's main courtyard, with the recovered trucks of gold visible in the background as a powerful visual reminder of what had been at stake. As Ibrahim approached the podium, he could see the faces of journalists, government officials, and ordinary citizens who had gathered to hear his account of the night's events. "My fellow citizens of Burkina Faso," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Last night our security forces intercepted 70 trucks carrying several tons of gold stolen from our mines. This gold belongs to all of us. It is the wealth of our nation, meant to fund schools for our children, hospitals for our sick, and infrastructure for our development." He paused, allowing the magnitude of what had been attempted to sink in with his audience. The criminals who organized this theft were not content to simply steal our resources. Their plan was to take our gold to foreign countries, process it into luxury goods, and then sell it back to us at enormous profit. They wanted to rob us twice, first by stealing our wealth, and then by selling it back to us at prices we could barely afford. Murmurs of anger and outrage rippled through the crowd as people grasped the full scope of the planned exploitation. "But they have failed," Ibrahim continued, his voice rising with conviction. "Our gold remains in Burkina Faso. It will be used as intended to build the future our children deserve. And the corrupt officials who betrayed their public trust to assist these criminals will face the full force of our justice system." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, with some people raising their fists in triumph and others wiping tears from their eyes. For many, this was the first time they had seen their government successfully defend their interests against powerful criminal networks. Ibrahim raised his hand for quiet and continued. "This victory belongs to all of us. It belongs to every farmer who works hard to feed our nation, every teacher who educates our children, every healthcare worker who cares for our sick, and every honest citizen who believes in our country's future. We will not allow thieves, whether foreign or domestic, to steal the resources that belong to our people." As the press conference concluded and Ibrahim returned to his office, he found himself facing a stack of reports about other suspicious activities at mining sites throughout the country. The successful interdiction of the gold convoy had apparently inspired mining companies and security officials to report irregularities they might have previously overlooked or ignored. Captain Traoré entered the office with additional intelligence, gathered from interrogating the captured drivers and investigating the corrupt officials who had been arrested during the night. "Mr. President, it appears this was not an isolated incident. We've uncovered evidence of similar thefts dating back several months, possibly involving even larger quantities of gold and other minerals." Ibrahim felt a weight settle on his shoulders as he contemplated the broader implications of what they had discovered. If criminal networks had been systematically looting the country's resources for months, the total value of what had been stolen could be astronomical, enough to fund major development projects that would have transformed thousands of lives. "Captain, I want a comprehensive audit of all mining operations in the country. I want to know exactly what has been produced, what has been officially exported, and what may have been stolen. And I want this information made public so our citizens can see the full scope of what has been happening." "Yes, sir. We're also tracking financial transactions associated with the corrupt officials. Some of them have been receiving payments far in excess of their official salaries, apparently from foreign accounts linked to international mining cartels." As the investigation expanded, Ibrahim realized they were confronting something much larger than a single theft. They were facing an entire system of exploitation designed to keep Africa poor while enriching foreign interests and their local collaborators. The fight to recover the stolen gold was just the beginning of a broader struggle for economic justice and genuine independence. Over the following days, as more details emerged about the criminal network that had been operating in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim found himself at the center of continental attention. Leaders from other African countries reached out to share similar experiences and coordinate anti-corruption efforts. International media covered the story as an example of African leadership standing up to resource exploitation. But perhaps most importantly, ordinary citizens of Burkina Faso began to feel that their government was finally working for them rather than for foreign interests or corrupt elites. In villages and towns throughout the country, people spoke with new hope about development projects that might finally be funded with their own resources rather than dependent on foreign aid that came with strings attached. The recovered gold, after being properly processed and sold through official channels, funded the construction of 50 new schools, the establishment of medical clinics in previously underserved areas, and the drilling of water wells in remote villages that had never had access to clean drinking water. 3 months after the highway interdiction, Ibrahim stood in one of those new schools in a village called Tanghin Dasuri, about 40 kilometers from the capital. The building was simple but sturdy, constructed with locally sourced materials and designed to withstand the region's harsh weather conditions. Solar panels on the roof powered lights and a computer lab, while a deep water well in the courtyard provided clean drinking water for both the school and the surrounding community. The school's principal, a young woman named Ibrahim Traoré, who had returned from university studies in Ouagadougou specifically to serve her home village, showed Ibrahim through classrooms filled with eager students. The children ranged in age from 6 to 16, some having walked several kilometers that morning to attend classes. "Mr. President," Miriam said as they paused in a classroom where children were practicing mathematics. Before this school was built, many of these children had never held a pencil or seen a book. Now they're learning to read and write, studying mathematics and science, dreaming of careers they never knew existed. Ibrahim watched a 10-year-old girl named Rasmane work through a mathematics problem on the chalkboard, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she carefully formed numbers with the chalk. When she successfully solved the equation, her classmates applauded and her face lit up with pride and joy. "This is why we fought to recover that gold," Ibrahim thought to himself. For moments like this, when a child discovers her own potential. During the visit, Ibrahim also inaugurated the village's new medical clinic, a modest but well-equipped facility staffed by a nurse practitioner and visited weekly by a doctor from the regional hospital. The clinic's medicine cabinet was stocked with essential medications for treating malaria, respiratory infections, and other common ailments that had previously required dangerous journeys to distant medical facilities. The village chief, an elderly man named Bukari Sawadogo, who was actually Amadou's uncle, spoke to Ibrahim during the inauguration ceremony. "Mr. President, for 60 years I have watched young people leave this village because there was no future here. Now, for the first time, I see them choosing to stay, to build something here." Indeed, the availability of education and healthcare was already beginning to transform the village's demographics and economy. Young adults who might previously have migrated to cities in search of opportunities were now starting small businesses, improving agricultural techniques, and contributing to local development projects. But the impact of the recovered gold extended far beyond individual villages. At the national level, the successful interdiction had sent a clear message to both criminal networks and international partners that Burkina Faso was serious about protecting its resources and ensuring they benefited its people. Foreign mining companies operating in the country found themselves subject to much stricter oversight and transparency requirements. Government auditors regularly inspected mining operations, comparing official production records with actual extraction activities. A new law required that a percentage of all mining revenues be held in a sovereign wealth fund specifically designated for education and healthcare development. Captain Sori, who had been promoted to head a new anti-corruption task force, regularly briefed Ibrahim on the ongoing investigation into resource theft networks. "Sir, we've identified similar operations in at least 12 other African countries. The same criminal organizations, often working with the same corrupt officials, have been systematically looting natural resources across the continent." This discovery led Ibrahim to propose the creation of an African Resource Protection Alliance at the next African Union Summit. The alliance would coordinate intelligence sharing, joint law enforcement operations, and mutual support for countries fighting resource exploitation. The proposal was enthusiastically supported by leaders who had experienced similar challenges in their own countries. For too long, Africa has been rich in resources but poor in development because our wealth has been systematically stolen, Ibrahim told the assembled African leaders. It is time we work together to ensure that African resources benefit African people. The alliance quickly evolved into a continental anti-corruption initiative, with member countries sharing intelligence about suspicious mining activities, coordinating border security to prevent resource smuggling, and supporting each other's investigations into international criminal networks. Meanwhile, the corrupt officials who had been arrested in connection with the gold theft faced comprehensive prosecution. Their trials became a symbol of the government's commitment to accountability and justice. Several high-ranking officials, including a former mining minister and 2 provincial governors, received substantial prison sentences and had their assets confiscated to compensate for the damage they had caused. The trials also revealed the full scope of the corruption network that had been operating in Burkina Faso. Foreign businessmen had been paying bribes totaling millions of dollars to government officials in exchange for access to mining sites and protection from oversight. The stolen resources had been processed in facilities across West Africa before being sold on international markets, with the profits shared between foreign criminal organizations and corrupt local officials. 1 year after the highway interdiction, Ibrahim returned to the same stretch of road where the operation had taken place. A small monument had been erected at the site, commemorating what local people had begun calling the Night of Recovered Gold. The monument featured a simple plaque with the words, "Here, the future of Burkina Faso was defended by those who believe that our resources belong to our children." As Ibrahim stood beside the monument, he reflected on how much had changed in just 12 months. The recovered gold had funded not just schools and clinics, but also agricultural extension programs that were increasing food production, road improvements that were connecting remote communities to markets, and small business development initiatives that were creating employment opportunities for young people. Perhaps more importantly, the successful recovery operation had restored many citizens' faith in their government's ability and willingness to defend their interests. Public opinion polls showed dramatically increased trust in government institutions and optimism about the country's future. But Ibrahim also knew that the struggle was far from over. Criminal networks were adapting to increased security measures, finding new ways to exploit Africa's resources and corrupt officials. International demand for African minerals continued to create incentives for theft and exploitation. The work of protecting Burkina Faso's wealth would require constant vigilance and continued cooperation with international partners committed to justice and development. During a quiet moment at the monument, Ibrahim took out the photograph of young Aminata that he still carried in his jacket pocket. He had recently visited her village and found her excelling in the new school that had been built with funds from the recovered gold. She was now 12 years old, at the top of her class in mathematics and science, and still determined to become a doctor who would help her people. "We kept our promise to you," Ibrahim whispered to the photograph. "Your gold is building your future." As the sun set over the highway where 70 trucks of stolen gold had been stopped 1 year earlier, Ibrahim felt a deep sense of satisfaction and renewed determination. The battle for Africa's resources would continue, but tonight's victory had proven that it was a battle that could be won through courage, determination, and unwavering commitment to the people's welfare. The wind carried the scent of rain across the savannah, promising the life-giving moisture that would soon transform the golden grasslands into green pastures. Like that rain, the recovered gold had brought new life and hope to communities throughout Burkina Faso, nurturing dreams and possibilities that had seemed impossible just a year before. In villages across the country, children like Aminata were studying by the light of solar-powered lamps, learning to read from textbooks purchased with their own nation's wealth, dreaming of futures that were now within their reach. Teachers, doctors, and engineers were working in facilities built with resources that belonged to the people they served. The gold of Burkina Faso was finally serving its true purpose, building a future worthy of the land and people who had given it birth. and on a quiet highway under the African stars. A simple monument stood as a reminder that sometimes, when good people refuse to accept injustice, the future itself can be recovered and protected for generations yet to come. As Ibrahim's convoy departed the monument site and headed back toward Ouagadougou, the president made a silent vow. As long as he had breath in his body and strength in his arms, the wealth of Burkina Faso would serve the people of Burkina Faso. The children deserved nothing less, and their future was worth any sacrifice required to protect it. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, each point of light, a reminder of the infinite possibilities that awaited a nation whose resources were finally being used to fulfill its people's dreams. The gold had been recovered, the criminals had been stopped, and the future had been secured, at least for now, and at least for those brave enough to fight for what was right. In the distance, the lights of the capital city beckoned, where tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve the people. But tonight, as the presidential convoy traveled through the darkness toward home, Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself a moment of quiet pride in what had been accomplished through courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The gold of Burkina Faso was safe, and with it, the hopes and dreams of millions of people who deserved the chance to build the future they envisioned for themselves and their children. 5 years had passed since that pivotal night on the highway, and the transformation of Burkina Faso had exceeded even Ibrahim's most optimistic projections. The success of the gold recovery operation had become a catalyst for comprehensive national reform, inspiring similar actions across West Africa and fundamentally changing how the continent approached resource management. In the presidential palace, now expanded with a new wing dedicated to the African Resource Protection Alliance headquarters, Ibrahim reviewed the latest development statistics with a sense of profound satisfaction. Literacy rates had increased by 40%. Child mortality had dropped to its lowest level in the country's history. Rural electrification had reached communities that had never seen electric lights before the recovered gold-funded solar installation programs. The economic impact extended far beyond the immediate value of the intercepted gold. The government's demonstrated commitment to protecting national resources had attracted legitimate foreign investment from companies seeking transparent, reliable partnerships. International development organizations had increased their funding commitments, confident that their resources would be used effectively rather than diverted through corruption. Dr. Aminata Sawadogo, for the young girl from the photograph, had indeed achieved her dream of becoming a doctor, now served as director of the National Rural Health Initiative, a program that deployed mobile medical clinics to remote villages using vehicles and equipment purchased with mining revenues. At 27, she had become a symbol of what was possible when a nation's wealth served its people's aspirations. "Mr. President," she said during their monthly meeting to review health program progress, "we've now established permanent medical facilities in over 300 villages that previously had no health care access. Maternal mortality rates in these areas have dropped by 60%, and childhood vaccination coverage is approaching universal levels." Ibrahim smiled as he listened to her report, remembering the thin, hopeful child he had met in that first rural school visit. Her transformation from an impoverished village girl to a nationally prominent physician embodied everything he had hoped to achieve through protecting Burkina Faso's resources. The international implications of the gold recovery operation continued to resonate across Africa and beyond. The African Resource Protection Alliance had grown to include 37 member countries, coordinating intelligence sharing and joint operations that had recovered billions of dollars worth of stolen resources. Criminal networks that had once operated with impunity now faced coordinated resistance from governments committed to protecting their people's wealth. Captain Sori, now General Sori and commander of the Continental Anti-Corruption Task Force, regularly briefed African Union leadership on the alliance's successes. "In the past 5 years, we've interdicted over 200 illegal resource extraction operations, arrested more than 5,000 criminals and corrupt officials, and recovered natural resources worth over $12 billion, he reported. During the most recent Continental Security Summit, These recovered resources had funded infrastructure, projects across participating countries, highways, connecting previously isolated regions, universities training the next generation of African professionals, renewable energy installations reducing dependence on expensive fuel imports, and telecommunications networks bringing internet access to rural communities for the first time. The success had not gone unnoticed by international criminal organizations, who had responded by attempting to develop more sophisticated methods of resource exploitation. However, the alliance's intelligence capabilities had evolved even faster, using advanced technology and international cooperation to track suspicious activities across continental borders. Ibrahim's leadership model had also inspired political reforms in other countries, with citizens demanding greater transparency and accountability from their governments. The Burkina Faso model of resource protection and transparent governance had become a case study in development economics programs at universities worldwide. But perhaps the most meaningful changes were visible in individual communities throughout Burkina Faso. In Tangindasouri, the village where Ibrahim had inaugurated one of the first schools built with recovered gold funds, a thriving educational complex now served students from across the region. The original one-room schoolhouse had expanded into a comprehensive campus, offering education from primary through secondary levels, with specialized programs in agriculture, technology, and healthcare. Mariam Kabore, the school's original principal, had become regional education director, overseeing similar developments in dozens of communities. "What we've accomplished here proves that Africa doesn't need charity," she often told visiting educators and development officials. "We need justice, the opportunity to use our own resources for our own development." The village's economic transformation had been equally dramatic. What had once been a subsistence farming community now hosted small manufacturing businesses, a regional market center, and even a modest tourism industry as visitors came to see the educational and healthcare facilities that had become models for rural development. Young people who might once have migrated to urban areas in search of opportunities now found meaningful work and education opportunities in their home communities. The village's population had actually increased as former migrants returned to participate in the local renaissance. Similar transformations were occurring throughout Burkina Faso and across alliance member countries. The recovered resources had created a virtuous cycle of development. Improved education produced more skilled workers, better health care increased productivity, and enhanced infrastructure attracted investment and created employment opportunities. The ripple effects extended beyond economics into culture and social cohesion. Communities that had previously felt abandoned by their governments now took pride in national identity and participated actively in democratic processes. Voter turnout had increased dramatically, and citizen engagement with government institutions reflected renewed trust in public service. International recognition of Burkina Faso's transformation had been substantial. Ibrahim had received numerous awards for leadership and governance, and the country had become a preferred destination for development partnerships and foreign investment. More importantly, other African leaders regularly visited to study and adapt the resource protection model for their own countries. During a recent state visit to neighboring Ghana, whose own gold resources had been subject to similar exploitation attempts, Ibrahim had shared the lessons learned from the highway operation and its aftermath. "The key insight," he told Ghanaian leaders, "is that protecting our resources requires more than just catching thieves. It requires building systems of transparency, accountability, and citizen engagement that make corruption difficult and development inevitable." The Ghana visit had resulted in a bilateral agreement for joint border security and resource protection, extending the alliance's reach and effectiveness. Similar agreements with other neighboring countries were creating a regional network that made large-scale resource theft increasingly difficult and risky, as Ibrahim reflected on the 5-year journey from that dramatic night on the highway to the present moment of sustained progress. He felt both pride in what had been accomplished and determination to continue the work that remained. The fight against resource exploitation and corruption was ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation to new challenges. But the fundamental principle established that night that Africa's resources belonged to Africa's people and would be defended, accordingly had taken root and flourished beyond his most ambitious dreams. The gold of Burkina Faso had indeed become the foundation for a future worthy of the land and people who had nurtured it. In schools and clinics, universities and businesses, farms and factories throughout West Africa, the legacy of that midnight interdiction continued to create opportunities and transform lives. Children who had been born since the operation were growing up in a world where their natural inheritance was protected and invested in their future rather than stolen to enrich distant criminals. The monument on the highway had become a pilgrimage, site for visitors from across Africa and beyond, a symbol of what was possible when leaders had the courage to defend their people's interests against powerful criminal networks. But the real monument to that night's work was visible in every classroom where children learned to read, every clinic where mothers received health care, every village where clean water flowed from wells drilled with their own nation's wealth. As the sun set over Ouagadougou on the 5th anniversary of the gold recovery operation, Ibrahim stood once again on the palace balcony where he had received the urgent call about suspicious truck movements. The city sprawling below him was visibly more prosperous, with new buildings, improved roads, and the lights of expanded electrical infrastructure creating a tapestry of progress and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There always were new challenges in the work of building a just and prosperous society. But tonight, as stars emerged in the African sky, Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction in knowing that the gold of Burkina Faso was still safe, still serving its people, still building the future that every child deserved. The fight for Africa's resources had been won, at least in this corner of the continent, and the victory was measured not just in tons of gold recovered, but in millions of lives transformed and futures secured through the simple but revolutionary principle that a nation's wealth should serve its people's dreams.